Welcome back to the Mike Brunick Show, where we are breaking down business, leadership, revenue, and more through the lens of a Marine veteran, entrepreneur, business and fitness coach, and revenue expert. Mike, thank you so much for being with us this week.
Well, thanks for hosting again, Rylan.
It's my absolute delight. Today we're talking about Valor in the Valor Advisors context. And for those who may not know, Valor stands for an acronym, which we're going to go through with the next couple of episodes. But to start with the V in Valor, we're going to talk about verifying current situation, which is one of the pillars of the Valor method. And I want you to just take us through, why would someone want to even verify their current position? Why is it so critical?
Yeah, it's a really obvious principle of, anytime we work as consultants, anytime we work as coaches, anytime you work as a leader, one of your primary jobs is to get an organization or a client from where they are to where they want to be. And quite often we'll use navigational language for that. What is the path to get from point A to point B? And what we found, particularly what I found through my career, and especially through the consulting and coaching work that I've been doing recently, is that we can do a session with an executive team or a business owner, an individual, and get them to do a good job of articulating what their goals are, where they'd like to be in 6 months, or where they'd like to be in 3 years. And getting an executive team aligned on a future vision is a fun and fruitful and completely necessary exercise. But where I see companies falling down, failing, is in their ability, or inability in this case, to really clearly come to a shared and honest understanding of where they currently are. So if I were to just try to give somebody directions, if I called a restaurant and said, hey, can you tell me how to get to your restaurant? The person working the hostess stand would say, tell me where you're coming from. It's a really critical piece of information. I can't tell you how to get to a place, how to draw a path from point A to point B without knowing point A. But when I work with executive teams and I say, all right, we're going to work on first establishing a shared vision of where we are, it is surprising, often surprising to me, to see how much pushback I get on that. People start to think that really being honest about current situation might upset people. It might be a political conversation. It might be something that causes disruption or conflict. And so I'll often hear people saying, no, we just want to focus on the future. We just want to talk about what's next and not about where we are. And obviously, if you're navigating from point A to point B and you can't agree on point A, your path is much more difficult to determine.
That's a great answer. If someone is enlisting your help in figuring out where exactly they are, is there a point where you as their coach say, full transparency, no judgment, I just need the true, clear definition of where you're at? And is there a way to tell if they're not necessarily being clear and transparent with you?
I think it's much more important that people are clear with themselves. I mentioned a moment ago that one of the most important aspects of determining or verifying current situation is a shared understanding. So does everybody agree on where we are? Now, occasionally you'll get a group of people to share the same delusions, to all be convinced, for example, that they've got a leg up on product quality, when in fact they don't. As an example, I could come up with lots more examples. So it is possible for groups to be wrong. It's less likely once you get people in a place where they are being honest, and that's sort of step one, is to create an environment in an offsite or in a meeting, much more importantly, an ongoing company culture of honesty, of saying when something's working and saying when something's not working, and understanding and measuring what the results are. But once you've created that sort of culture of honesty and healthy debate, groups are often typically very good at coming to an answer if they're allowed to say the truth out loud.
Yeah.
But we at Valor Advisors talk about verifying current situation on purpose. So it isn't guess at current situation. It isn't convince yourself about current situation. It is really about verifying. So determining what you think to be true and identifying what data or information or indicators would support or not support that assumption about the truth and verifying. So we believe in lots of different assessment tools and lots of different ways of collecting data to make sure that you are confirming what you believe to be true. And that's really where the V in that acronym is for verify.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned something about measuring. What are some of those KPIs that you would look at typically when assessing a business's current situation?
Well, it depends on what it is we're trying to verify. What I have found is that lots of big companies do a good job of collecting data and do a pretty good job of making sense of the data that they collect. They tend to do not as well is to confirm that the data they're collecting and analyzing is actually the data that they need. I'm reminded sometimes of an old joke. It's got to be 100 years old, this joke, that my grandfather used to tell. And the joke goes that a police officer is walking down a city street late at night and he sees a guy who's pretty clearly drunk and he's on his hands and knees under a streetlight and looking for something, and the police officer says, can I help you? And the guy says, yeah, I'm walking home from the pub and I dropped my house keys and I won't be able to get into my apartment if I can't find my keys. So the cop helps him look for a minute and they're clearly not there, and he says, are you sure you dropped them here? And the drunk guy says, no, I dropped them up the street. I'm looking here because the light is better. It's a terrible old joke, right? It's one of those vaudeville knee slappers, right? But I'm reminded of that sometimes when I talk to companies about their dashboards, and I'm talking to companies about the data that they collect and analyze. And quite often, as I said, they do a good job of making sense of the data they have, but they haven't stepped back and said, do I have the data that I need? Am I just looking under the streetlight that I have? Or should I build a streetlight where it's dark? And so that is the joke comes to mind as an analogy of reminding companies to ask themselves not just what's the data they have and what does it say, but what data do they wish they had? What data do they need to truly verify where they are? So again, it might be about customer satisfaction. It might be about the relative strengths and weaknesses of your product. It might be about the effectiveness of your sales process. It might be about the market. It might be about all kinds of things. And what is it that we don't know? And how do we go about collecting the information to help us determine our current situation?
That's a funny story and a good answer, all rolled up in one.
And a terrible old joke.
And a terrible joke, but still, it adds a certain old man humor to the
Thank you.
storyline here. You're welcome.
Am I the old man in that?
No, your grandfather is the
Okay.
100-year-old joke. So as we're, on this journey to verify where our current situation is and how to get to point B, who do we need in that room? Is it really a C-suite that's meeting up? Is it a sales rep who has day-to-day knowledge of how things are going? Is it getting a couple of customer surveys? When we sit down at that conference table, who needs to be there?
The answer is everyone. Information is found in lots of sources. Customer interviews, talking to every employee, the person on the loading dock or the person who does the invoicing. It's often surprising where the answers come from. And so collecting as much information as possible, obviously in an organized way, is important. Companies will sometimes say, look, we don't want to get into analysis paralysis. We don't want to delay making decisions because we're constantly in information gathering mode. And that is a legitimate concern and an experience that you'll occasionally see companies go through. But it's rarer than people think. That they tend to make decisions in an information vacuum and would have been served by efficiently, quickly, but thoroughly collecting more information. So who should be in the room from an information gathering perspective? As many voices as can reasonably be collected. From a decision-making perspective, that's obviously a much smaller group and typically centers around an executive team or a leadership team. Sometimes it's the board and the C-suite. Sometimes it's the C-suite and the first-level vice presidents. But small enough group so that you've got a good decision-making process in place. But best done not with just a single person or a couple of people.
Got it. So, let's talk about ego interference here. Let's say I'm our CEO and I've gathered my C-suite. I've got a couple of customer voices in the room, a few lower level middle managers, and I'm trying to gauge where we're at. But it is hard for me to get my team to be honest. How can I get them to let their guard down and voice concerns or voice inadequacies within the company or within the organization?
Yeah, as I said before, there's often politics involved, especially with an executive team, and it feels like the bigger the company, the bigger the egos. It's difficult for a group of executives to sit around and talk about deficiencies in one of the people at the table's departments. Our operations team is too slow and inefficient. Our product quality is poor. Our sales team isn't closing enough deals. Those types of conversations can be fraught with emotions and politics. And it is the job of the leader in that organization to create a culture of honesty, a culture of accuracy, a culture of supporting assertions with data so that we're not in feelings, we are in realities. We have to be able to identify things where we need improvements so that we can improve. And if an organization continues to say everything's fine, then it improves. And so it's one of the most important jobs of a leader is to establish a culture where people are safe to identify things that they've tried and didn't work within their own department, and safe for others to identify perceived areas of improvement in other people's organizations. And again, a culture of verifying those assertions with data.
That's great. I think we've got a really good baseline for getting it's time for one to verify your current position and then going through the steps of hiring a consultant or a coach to help you through those steps and help your company get to the place where we can all sit in a room and talk honestly about where we're at, verifying that current situation. And the way that we've been ending these episodes lately for our first-time listeners is a lightning round of a couple of fun questions and then maybe a couple of serious business-minded questions. And if you're up for it, Mike, I've got a couple prepared for you.
I think I'm ready.
All right. I don't know if you are. Last time I threw you for a loop with mountains or beach, but I'll try to go easier this time. All right. Starting with question number 1. Is Pluto a planet?
No. Scientists say it's not.
Okay.
I was raised that it was, and then they changed their mind. They got more data. So this is a great example of continuing to collect data to either support or refute your currently held beliefs. The scientific community is the best at continuing to collect data and making new conclusions from new data.
See, I'm a firm believer that if you have earned planetary status, it is not up to the whims of science, the waves of, discovery to tell you otherwise. I think once you've earned it, it's there, you can't lose it. But that's just me.
Okay.
All right, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Sure.
Okay.
Or Hawaiian pizza's lovely.
I love it. I had it last night. It was the best.
All right.
All right. When is the last time you re-gifted a gift that you received, and what was it?
Oh, I try not to regift. I feel it's it hurts me in my heart to regift. Occasionally, I might regift a gift card.
Oh, I see. I don't know if that counts as a re-gifted gift. I think it's just maybe a pass it on situation. All right. Let's get the best piece of advice that you've ever received.
Best piece of advice I ever received. Maybe sticking with the theme of today's episode, verifying current situation. I spent some time, flag behind my head might give you a clue there. I spent some time in the U.S. Marines as an infantry officer. And at 22 years old, I was a brand new second lieutenant, and I was responsible for a platoon of Marines, about 40 or so Marines. I'd been in the Marine Corps for a hot minute, and so everybody in the unit had been in the Marine Corps longer than I was, but I was in charge. I was the officer. And your one unforgivable sin is to get them lost. We did a lot of hiking, we did a lot of running, we did a lot of time on our feet, and if you didn't know where you were, and it resulted in extra miles getting walked or meals missed or sleeping bags missed, it was tough to get that trust back. And so the piece of advice I got was always know where you are. And it honestly is a really important piece of advice for my senior executives. I work with CEOs who, back to our verify current situation, don't always know where they are. And so I'll continue to give them the advice that I got as a 22-year-old second lieutenant from my company commander, captain, which was just always know where you are. Don't be lost. It's an unforgivable sin.
I love that. All right. And is there something that you regret not buying that you think about it could be years later?
Well, the obvious examples go around stocks that I could have purchased that went way up. I had a friend who was a cryptocurrency nerd in the very early days when none of us really knew what it was. And we spent a weekend fishing, several of us, and he tried to convince us that we should all be buying Bitcoin. And at the time, Bitcoin was, I don't know, $100 a bit or something, and now it's $100,000 a bit or like. I don't even want to look because I of course thought he was a knucklehead and didn't buy any. So maybe that's a common regret of people who look at whatever stock or whatever. I wish I'd bought property in this place because now it's worth a fortune.
Yeah.
So that's maybe a easy out kind of answer, but that's an obvious one for me.
That's a reasonable one. I've felt the same way, but yeah. Well, that is all the lightning round questions I have for you today. And
easy on me today.
Yeah, I know. No beach or mountains. I didn't know that one would be such a trip for you, but
right.
Yeah, but that's okay. Well, I just want to say thank you again for being with us today, Mike, and for taking us through what it means to verify your current position as a business leader.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bradley.